Football fans, picture this. You bet on your favorite player to score the first touchdown, and he throws an awesome block so his teammate can score instead. If this happens, BetMGM wants to give you another chance at the end zone. With BetMGM's second chance promotion, you'll get your stake back if your first touchdown scorer scores second instead. That's right, bet on any pro football player to score the first touchdown of the game. If you're right, you win. If your player scores second, you get your stake back in cash. Everyone knows the most exciting part of football is the score. With BetMGM's second chance promotion, you have a chance to keep the fun going after the first player crosses the goal line. Place a first touchdown scorer wager today. BetMGM and GameSense remind you to play responsibly. See BetMGM.com for terms. 21 plus only, DC only. Existing customer offer. Subject to eligibility requirements. Rewards vary. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Our iHeartRadio Music Festival, presented by Capital One, coming back to Las Vegas, September 20th and 21st. A weekend full of superstar performances. A$AP Rocky, Big Sean, Camila Cabello, Doja Cat, Dua Lipa, Gwen Stefani, Halsey, Hozier, Keith Urban, New Kids on the Block, Paramore, Shabuzi, The Black Crowes, The Weeknd, Thomas Rhett, Victoria Monet, Coldplay's Chris Martin, and more. Stream live only on Hulu and get tickets to be there at AXS.com.
You're listening to 100 Words or Less with Ray Harkins. What's cooking, everybody? Welcome to the podcast in which we talk to people who are involved in independent music, who have been shaped by it, who care about it for much longer than any of us normal human beings are supposed to be. I, myself, would definitely define myself as not normal. I know how to act normal. I know many of us do. But anyways, I digress. Thank you for downloading this thing, listening to this podcast, spreading the word. I've been seeing many of you tagging the podcast, sharing it where you could in regards to just being like, hey, this is a great episode. This came out a year ago. Listen to it. It's great. Because truthfully, that's the point of this podcast. This is basically an audio zine, as it were. I'm documenting all these conversations. You can listen to them at any point throughout your musical journey, as it were. And that's a great thing because I know that I love to visit old zines of mine. I read interviews from, 1993 or whatever. It's like, oh my gosh, like that's so cool that this person was thinking this way to inform their art and blah, blah, blah. Anyways, I digress. But today's guest is a great one because I personally had never met him. I wasn't a huge fan of his band, but I got into his story, his band, via a podcast. So let me lay this out for you. His name is Jon Lullo, and he played in a band called Down to Earth Approach. And the podcast that I mentioned is called Even If It Kills Me, which you can find on any podcast player. I highly, highly recommend it. It's 6 episodes long. You're in, you're out, but I think anybody that has an experience with, playing in bands or watching friends play in bands, like anybody at all, you're able to find a lot of value in this podcast. And I really enjoyed it. I got this as a pitch and I was like, I don't know, like maybe not really passionate about Down to Earth Approach, but after the podcast, I was like, dude, I got to talk to Jon. And then lo and behold, we have like 9 million friends together. And it's just, this is the beauty of independent music. And he was very open in sharing his story. And he's also had a lot of success within the Hollywood context of, working in film production and a bunch of other cool things. But anyways, just so press pause, listen to that Even If It Kills Me podcast, come back to this conversation because it will be, you're able to paint a clearer picture with all of that, or you don't have to, and you can just listen to this conversation and it'll be equally as informative, or maybe not equally, but it will be informative. Let's put it that way. Let's talk about some orders of business. First and foremost, you can always email the show 100wordspodcast@gmail.com. Love to hear feedback. What's up, people reach out just to say hi and thank you for recommending this record, or thank you for, interviewing this person. Here's another idea. I would say that probably like 15 to 20% of the ideas that I get from the podcast are from listeners like you who have like, oh man, it would be great if you spoke to this person. So never be shy, reach out. Also, leave a rating and review on the Apple Podcast page, and then also leave a rating on Spotify. All of those things help. And then follow. Like, you have the ability to follow, which means you will be able to get notified when the new podcast hits. I publish these on a weekly basis, and sometimes it's a nice little reminder. You get a tap on the shoulder to be like, hey, new episode's out. Check it out. You can also follow on the Apple Podcast page as well. All of those things help tremendously and keep you in the know. Also, I have to speak about my experiences playing some shows again. I did 2 shows. I played with my band, Taken. We played the reunion gigs of This Day Forward, who was a band that we spent a ton of time on the road with in, early 2000s, I want to say. Those of you that are keeping very close track, if you listen to an episode that we put out 2-3 weeks ago, with Vadim from This Day Forward and Chris from On the Might of Princes. We were talking about our show at the Bowery Ballroom. We also played in Philly at the Underground Arts. And it's just really special. Like, there's no other way that I can describe it. Not only because it's really fun to hang out with friends and obviously play a show, but it's really, really exciting and important to make these connections with people who are impacted by your art, large, small, everything in between. Because it's like, specifically at the New York show, there were multiple people that came up to me that were like, hey, I traveled here to watch you in This Day Forward, or you and On the Might of Princes, or I don't even know your band, and I was so glad to watch it. Just having these interactions is really, really special, because people not only spend money to attend these shows, and I know it sounds like so basic and simple, but it's true. Like, there's all of these steps that people have to go to in order to show up to a thing. And it's not lost on me. And I had a great time, and huge shout out to This Day Forward. And if you've never listened to This Day Forward, dive in, because man, watching those songs that I frankly only saw a couple of times, because they broke up right on the heels of a full length that they put out on Equal Vision Records called In Response, and hearing some of those songs, then hearing other songs, like I forgot how much I enjoy their Kyrios, I'm not exactly sure, their Kyrios EP. You can find it on any streaming platform, but man, I love those songs. Was Sunshine and Waterfalls, something like that. I'm just trying to operate off of like a 20-year-old memory, but anyways, huge shout out, and huge shout out to people who tapped in and said, hey, listen to the podcast, love what you do there. It's always, always really cool to connect with people on that human to human level. So let's talk weekly recommendations, right? Because that is something I've been doing the entire year, making sure that you're plugged into any new music that I'm tripping across, or old music that I just tripped across randomly from other recommendations or whatever the case may be. I toss all this into a Spotify playlist that you'll be able to find a link in the show notes and follow along, because I love recommending music, and I think that's why we all show up to these things, whether it's shows, whether it's zines, podcasts, whatever it is. So anyways, this week's recommendation is dovetailed off of a book. I have to give the shout out to the book first, and then be able to, back into the musical recommendation. So I was listening to a very long podcast from Henry Rollins. He is not a short-winded person, and this is coming from me, a very long-winded person. I love Henry Rollins. I've watched him perform a couple of times on his like storyteller raconteur touring that he does. I just think he's incredibly entertaining, so dialed in. Like, that's an understatement of the century. So anyways, he put out a book. Well, this is actually the 3rd volume I picked up. The 4th volume is out now on his self-titled publishing. Not self-titled, but it's like 2/13/64/61, something like that. It's basically his birthday, but he puts out these books on his own. The series is called Stay Fanatic. The one that I ordered was the 3rd volume, just because I was like, oh, I'll order the 3rd and then I'll ramp up into the 4th. But it is a love letter to vinyl. It is a love letter to the obscure details about vinyl that because I'm not going to put you in the same boat as me, but many of us have a very large affinity for, where it's like, oh man, how does the European pressing differ from the American pressing or whatever? He gets into such granular detail that it is you don't get lost in the weeds. Like, I read about records that I personally have no connection to. I don't care about this particular band, not because I think they're bad, but I just have no personal connection. And I read the most minute details, and I found something very, very useful and informative about all this. So anyways, that's the book series. Order that. But the music that I'm recommending is, it just pushed me to listen to bands who I, for one reason or another, not written off per se, but I've just been like, oh, it's not for me. Like a band like The Fall. I was just like, do I really need to listen to this now? Like, I'm a grown-ass adult. I've seen their name around forever. They are, lauded as a very historically important band as far as post-punk is concerned. Anyways, so I listened to The Fall. Really good. But the revelation for me was The Boys Next Door, which I enjoy Nick Cave. I think he's a great artist, musician, like just awesome. Love what he does. I knew that he did The Birthday Party, but this is pre-Birthday Party. This is like his first band. I think it's his first band. This record came out like late 70s, I want to say, early 80s maybe, but there's only one record. I listened to it, and this like gave me the same sort of feeling like when you first get into Joy Division and then you understand that they were called something different at the very beginning, which they were called Warsaw. It gave me the same feeling. I listened to this and I was like, dude, this is so good, so ahead of its time, all of the things that you want to list. But anyways, I will toss The Boys Next Door into the playlist because that record is incredible. You can hear the young Nick Cave in there. But then on top of it all, this book is incredible. So order whatever volume of the series, whether it's 3, 4, I think there's still some of 2 left. But Stay Fanatic series. Thank you, Henry Rollins, for pushing me to listen to music that I just, have ignored for one reason or another. So anyways, long intro today. I apologize, but there's a lot of stuff I had to get to. So anyways, let's talk to Jon Lullo from Down to Earth Approach and the Even If It Kills Me podcast. And also, special note, they're playing, if you listen to this, like literally the day it's released, they are playing a reunion show on September 7th in upstate New York. You can go to Down to Earth Approach.com, and you'll be able to find out all the information. I'll also link it in the show notes as well. So anyways, let's talk to Jon right now.
Makes mistakes, you let me down for the last time.
First and foremost, I have to congratulate you on the podcast because I do think, it's really good. I'm not just saying that because I'm supposed to say that, but I legitimately listen to every episode, and I was like, this is cool because it's approachable to nerds like me who are like, I know literally like, the venues you're talking about, like all of the nerdy details that you're not actually even specifically mentioning, but I'm like, oh, I know you're talking about, the Chants in Poughkeepsie or whatever. Like, I just know these things. But then,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but then you're making it generalized where it obviously is just focused on the story of what it is like to pursue your creative ambitions. And so I know this is like a total cliche tee-up conversations, but like why do this now? And like, why share, this experience? Did you just kind of feel like it was important alongside of your friend who obviously had all this great archival footage?
Well, I guess first of all, thank you very much. I appreciate, that you took the time to listen. I feel like it's hard getting people to listen to a 3-minute song, let alone like a 2.5 hour, 6-episode podcast. So I appreciate it very much.
Of course.
I would say basically what happened was it was COVID and I was kind of losing my mind. Aaron was kind of losing his mind. He stumbled on a box of like 90 mini DV, tape cassettes. So we were like, I told him, let's just digitize them for fun so we can check everything out. And, maybe there's something we can make with it. So once we saw what we had, it was really like, no one cares about this band enough for this to be a documentary. I'm now a producer. I make a lot of docs, a lot of music docs. And, so I kind of was thinking like, this doesn't fit those rails. That doesn't make any sense, but we could probably make a cool podcast. And I haven't heard that done yet, at least as far as like from the perspective of a band on the road. And I would say like, while we started kicking around ideas, the thing that was always most important to us was we didn't want it to become the emo podcast. Like, it's totally fine if everyone knew it was about that genre of music or that kind of band. But I knew if it was like, XYZ band putting out a podcast about like a slice of time, I probably wouldn't necessarily be interested, because probably for the same reason that some people would be interested, but it's just kind of like, I'm more interested in looking at it from, what would appeal to like someone who played baseball in high school and always thought, oh, wouldn't being a musician on the road be something awesome, right? Like, I wanted to appeal to normal people and not just be like a niche, tinier audience. So for us, it was always like, let's keep things super general and loose and make it about the story of the journey of the band and not about the kind of music that it was. Because that could just easily be a distraction. So we were kind of like, what if This American Life made like, a 6-part series about, a guy who toured with his friend's band, which would also further remove it from being the emo podcast, because it's through Aaron's eyes, and Aaron's like, if you can't tell, a massive Fish fan. So it's like,
right.
He's different from all the rest of the other guys in the scene, and he has a different perspective, and it's interesting. I always have been a fan of Aaron's writing. He's always been writing, like, ever since I've known him, and like since like 4th grade or 3rd grade or whatever crazy age it was that we met, but I've never seen him finish a project. So my goal in this was like, I want to make this with Aaron and get something across the finish line with him, because I think he's talented and we could do something really cool. And it would allow us to spend a lot of time together hanging out. I kind of end up making stuff with my friends a lot. That's just like what we do for fun. So it was just a thing we could make together and try and make it like really good and something that we could both be really proud of. And honestly, it ended up being probably one of my favorite things that I've been involved in, for sure. Like, I'm very happy with how it turned out. So
no, it's really
long-winded answer for you, but
that's the point. Welcome to podcasting, obviously. But I agree. I mean, there's a lot of sentiments that I agree with in regards to why you wanted to do it and all that sort of stuff. But the thing that resonates with me with what you just said is, like, truthfully, as a like complete podcast nerd myself, in the same way that, like, we were joking about off mic, where it's like you have all these dumb pieces of information in your head of like, oh yes, I remember when this band released this demo and this 7-inch. It's like, I'm the same way with podcasting. But anyway, my whole hobby horse has always been like, the reason music podcasts aren't like, quote unquote mainstream in the same way that, like, This American Life or other shows where it's like, we haven't seen that one music show that's popped, is because people have such a strong attachment to bands and music. Well, they're already make up their mind about like, oh yeah, dude, I'm never going to listen to, your point, an emo podcast about, what is this band? Like, oh, they're on Vagrant? Dude, they probably suck. Like, whatever. Like, there's so much baggage, and you trying to remove, leave that distance between the audience and whatever opinion they have about the band. Because, like, truthfully, most people can think the music you put out sucks, but they will find value in this show. Like, I'm not just saying that. Like, it's like
that's the goal, man. Like, it's the thing is like I'm a realistic person, and when we were an active band, we just weren't big enough for that to be an interesting selling point to anyone 20 years later. Like, that's insanity. You know what I mean? So yeah, so my whole thing was taking the window dressing off, and like, it's about a band eating shit for
Sure.
4 years on the road, right? Like that's what it's got to be about, and not about all of like the fun haircuts and, you know, all the other stuff happening.
Right. Well, it's not like the navel gazing at a particular scene. It's the navel gazing of the idea of just what it's like to play in a band of an independent variety. And like, I don't care if you are, you know, a death metal band, a, you know, screamo, hardcore, whatever, like there are roots in exactly what you're talking about with everybody, because everybody starts from somewhere for the most part. And for you to tell that story of just like, oh yes, this is what it's like to have ambitions and then also have them kind of be subverted. But then also like we achieved way more than we ever anticipated with the band in ways that, and it's like, it all feels like gravy, I'm sure. Like when you were talking about in particular, like I'll focus on like when you were doing, you know, the quote unquote summer tour, that was obviously the Warped Tour. Just that idea of being able to showcase like how unreal of an experience it was, but then also how like soul crushing in many respects it was, where it's like that push pull of both the polarities of the feelings was probably hard to have perspective until you look back at it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not joking in the part of the episode where we talk about the stress dream I have. I literally still have it to this day. That like fucked me up in the head in a way that 20 years later, it still haunts me, and it's like, it's crazy. So it was such an incredibly fun and like joyful experience for the most part. I mean, we were splitting our bus with Monine, and those guys are the Canadians we refer to. Those guys are like a shot of happiness all the time. Like they're the most uplifting band on earth to be around. So it was just so awesome, but then mixed with like the shittiest shows of your life. And it's so
Right.
crazy to have to like switch back and forth. You're like, well, that was terrible. Let's go hang out with all of our friends and get drunk for the rest of the day. You know, like it's so crazy, but it was so much fun. I mean, it was definitely a high point of the band.
Yeah.
The way we look at it now.
Absolutely. And we'll dig into pieces of that later, but I know like just putting the focus on you as a person, the area in which you grew up, I mean, like you kind of generically say that, you know, Down to Earth Approach was from like the upstate New York area. Where did you specifically, I guess, you know, grow up and were born and raised?
Batavia, New York, which is smack between Buffalo and Rochester.
Okay.
As far west as you can go before you hit Canada.
Okay.
Which explains the slight accent.
Got it. Well, I wouldn't have noticed that until you pointed it out. No. Okay. Got it. And so as you started to, you know, grow up and be introduced to, you know, independent music or music that your parents or siblings like did not listen to, how did that get exposed to you?
Well, it was interesting when I hit like, you know, I grew up, my dad always was like way into music. He was like into classic rock and stuff like Jimi Hendrix and Zeppelin. So I kind of grew up with him just blasting that when I would go visit him. My stepdad was a middle school band instructor. So music was always a thing around that house. I started my first band in 7th grade, and it was 3/4 of Down to Earth Approach, what ended up being Down to Earth Approach. So it's like I've been playing music since I was like 13. It's just one of those places where it's so small and there's nothing to do that, like, if you're a creative person, you'll probably gravitate towards an instrument and then be like, oh, we should make music because we live in the country and you can like practice in a barn, or like it's kind of like anything goes, as opposed to growing up in a city. There were a lot of local bands around at the time. There was this one called Fanny Cracker, which was like this rap rock hardcore band, but they were so fucking good for like being a band from that area. And I heard them, I think it was like 7th or 8th grade. It blew my fucking mind that they could be from our area and sound like that. So I got like real pumped on playing shows. You know, we were playing bars when I was like 14, 15 years old, and they were paying us in pitchers of beer, and we were meeting people. Buried Alive was a thing for a minute in Buffalo, and they were fucking awesome. Snapcase was from Buffalo, and I grew up going to all their shows and going to the record store in Buffalo where I can't remember his name, used to work.
Home of the Hits.
Bothering him. Yeah, exactly. Home of the Hits, baby. That was the best, that place.
I was just going to say, like, just to, double down on the Home of the Hits, like, there was, you, just like, I know you experienced, like, having these, totemic places, whether it's a, venue or record store or vegan restaurant or whatever. It's like, oh, you got to go there. And I remember going to Home of the Hits and, like, showing up there and being like, this is seriously it? Like, I mean, I've been to some weird places, but this seems like really uninspiring. But then you go in there and it's like, oh, I see what it is. But anyway, just like, I mean, you can describe it where it's like literally just a house. I often think about how important merch is, not only to me, but like the bands I've played in, and just like it actually got described to me recently. The idea of playing in a band is like a traveling t-shirt salesman, which, some might find as derogatory or sad, but it's like, merch is really important. And the reason I love merch is because of companies like rockabilia.com. So first and foremost, use the promo code 100 words or less. That's the number 100 words or less. It gets you 10% off your entire order. And I'm pulling all this connective tissue together because Rockabilia sells merch from a bunch of bands, but it's all officially licensed. And I don't care whether you're into like Iron Maiden, Green Day, or if you're like, you know what, I freaking love the Beatles and Eminem, or I'm super into Korn. I don't care. You will be able to find something of your interest. And if it's not your interest, you'll be able to find amazing gifts for people. Because let's be honest, like Christmas is literally right around the corner and you probably got some birthdays to celebrate. They ship from the Midwest here in the United States of America. And I just love what they do. Independently owned and operated, been doing this for over 30 years. They know what they're doing. And I love the fact that this is all officially licensed. That means the bands get paid. Everybody wins in this scenario, including you. When you use the promo code 100 words or less, 10% off your entire order. Just do that and have fun poking around their site, because I assure you will find something there for yourself or a loved one, because they're almost as important as you. I mean, you're the most important. Self-care, all that stuff. And what says self-care more than a t-shirt that you can put on your back? So anyways, shout out to Rockabilia for your continued support. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. You know what it's like when you're a kid, all of a sudden stuff's getting shoved in your brain, whether it's like school, I got to learn how to tie my shoes, or learning a language, or all of these things that we do. And then, the Peter Pan quote always comes in my mind when they're talking about growing up, like, don't grow up, it's a trap. And granted, there's, traps that exist, whether it's like, oh my gosh, like I'm too busy, I can't do anything. And, oh my gosh, like I really only think about, work or whatever. Stop. Just take a moment for yourself and explore that curiosity. Explore that with a third party. And that is why BetterHelp, I just love therapy personally. And I think BetterHelp is such an incredible option for people to dip into that is all online. It's incredibly easy to access for people. And on top of that, if you are curious about therapy, there is no better way than to sign up using my promo code, of course. So go to betterhelp.com/Ray and you will get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Ray. I wholeheartedly advocate for therapy and ignite that curiosity with someone else being like, hey, how do I carve time? How do I strategize? And then boom, your therapist is like, how about you do these things? And it's like, oh my gosh, you've just unlocked all this stuff in my brain. Now I'm going to put it in action. So go to betterhelp.com/Ray and get 10% off your first month now.
Totally. Yeah, it's a house and there's like maybe 50 CDs like at any given time, but they were like always curated and they always had something that I wanted that you would never expect to find. Like you would have to like order it, special order it back then. And then it was like, the lead singer of Snapcase working at the cash register, checking you out, which is crazy when you're 15 years old and you think that band was like huge,
Yep.
So it was awesome. So I would say, like, relative to how culturally bland the general area where I grew up is, there was like a little music scene going on. There were people playing a lot of music around me. So it always was an option. And it was like what I fell in love with super early on. I thought I wanted to do it for the rest of my life. I was convinced of it. And I just kind of like went hard on music instead of doing what normal kids did when they were teenagers. Like, we were playing every weekend. We were like always practicing. I just like went full. I'm like a all or nothing kind of guy, unfortunately. And I just went all in, like, at a super early age.
Well, I could tell that once especially with the idea, like, there are very few, independent punk, hardcore, indie rock, emo bands or whatever that have that notion of the relocation process. Like, oh, I need to be closer to the source, whatever the source may mean. And I found that so, like, and maybe that's why in my own head, I always had a problem sort of attributing down to earth approach to like anything. Cause it felt like me, a hyper aware person that was working, at record labels and record stores, to be like, where did these guys come from? Like, it didn't, it just, I was like, okay, they're on Vagrant. Like, that's sick. Like, in listening to it, I'm like, oh yeah, it adds up why they would be on Vagrant, like all the sonic similarities with all the other bands. But, anyways, but the all or nothing approach of being like, we're going to move from upstate New York to LA because LA is where you need to be.
Yeah. We were deciding between LA and, Jersey City. We were going to move to Jersey City or LA. And the thought behind it was, I basically rallied everyone to do that. And then we like voted together and picked. And, but my whole scheme was, if we all drop out of college and we move back to Batavia and we start doing this, like, it's going to go south. Like, someone's going to get distracted and get like, I don't know, like, it's not, no one's going to be focused because they're going to be in the same element that they've been in. So we have to take everyone completely out of their comfort zone, drop us in a brand new spot so that we have to make this work, was my thought. So we ended up, I somehow became friends with Darren Pfeiffer from Goldfinger because he's from a very close town to where I grew up. And Darren convinced me to move to LA over New York, being like, I'll throw you on, whatever LA Goldfinger shows I can and help you get on some other stuff. And which he totally did. He was awesome.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So we just kind of, we just moved to LA and had no jobs or no place to live and moved into the Holiday Inn in Glendale and lived there for 2 weeks while we all found jobs at the mall. And we got a 1-bedroom apartment. And yeah, just kind of did the thing.
Right. I do like that idea and approach because I mean, I think most, bands or creative endeavors do hit that spot where it's like, okay, like we need to focus whatever that may mean on, whether it's a record or whether it's, a tour, like you just get that singular focus and you're like, we got to remove all the distractions. And I love that idea of where your approach of just being like, yeah, we're going to go there. And then like, yes, like everything that we do is in service of the band, like everything, as opposed to any other external, it's like, yes, we'll get jobs or whatever to your point, but we're not going to let anything remove us from this overall approach of making the band our future.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like, to me, that was the safest route, was making it so that like we all had some serious skin in the game, right? Like that's when the magic happens. When everyone's like has the same motivation and is like, fuck it, let's go and just do this full throttle and see what happens and don't have an exit plan. So
right,
what we did, and I'm positive if we had moved back to Batavia and tried the same kind of stuff, like it wouldn't have worked. It would have fallen apart. We would have gained 400 pounds or something. Everyone would have gotten a comfortable job. It was just like, it would have fizzled out. So I definitely would do the same thing again the second time around.
Sure. And when you were talking about, I mean, the rest of the guys that you played with and Down to Earth Approach, like you've been playing since you were 13 years old. And I know for a fact that you probably went through, at least 15 different iterations of the style of bands you were trying to rip off or emulate, like every good 13 to 16-year-old does. What sort of different versions did you kind of go through, or was it always kind of roughly attached to the sound that Down to Earth Approach eventually had?
I would say when we first started in middle school, our ultimate goal would have been Weezer. So we were all massive Weezer fans. Blood had just come out. That's what we wanted to be as a band. In high school, we wanted to be No Effect and like a Fat Records melodic punk band.
Sure.
We tried that for a while. It didn't really feel natural for any of us. So, basically what happened was I went to France for half of my senior year of high school. So our high school band broke up right before I left for France. And when I came back from France, we reformed as a new band with a different bass player, and that ended up being Down to Earth Approach.
Got it. Why'd you go to France?
I could have graduated early. My friend was going to Costa Rica, and I was like, that's an option. And so I was thinking French. I was like, fuck it, I'm going to go to France. So I just signed up for the foreign exchange program, and no one ever asks to do it. So I got right in, and they sent my ass over there, which was a blast.
Got it.
17, I think it was 16 or 17. It was insane.
Right. Well, in the same way that it's like, when you start to tour in high school, the notion of that to not only most parents, but then your peers, where it's like, everyone comes back to school after summer vacation. It's like, oh, what did you do? You're like, I toured for like 2.5 months, and people are just like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? It doesn't make any sense. Toured. Like I went to summer camp, and like, well, I guess I did a version of that.
Right. Yeah, totally.
The idea, like something that I was interested in regards to like the perspective of where you were coming from, of the idea, like once you decided to make the move out to LA and, focus on the band and everything like that, the idea of quote unquote making it, that can, there's a lot of different steps on that journey and a lot of different metrics in which you can compare it to. Just speaking about your own personal vision, making it, I imagine, was just the idea of being like, I want to go on tour and I want to make a living off my band, no matter how like meager that may mean. Or was there other, I guess, comparisons that you were like looking to be like, this is my ideal definition of success?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, when it started, when we were a thing and we were moving to LA and getting signed, I would say, if I could have been the Get Up Kids, I would have been the happiest person on earth. Like our notion of success was playing sold out theaters, paying your bills, being able to have a family if you want, and being in a rad band like that. They were like the goal to us. Which is funny because now looking back, I'm sure those dudes were struggling. Brutally struggling the whole time. You know what I mean? I'm like, there's no way that even at their height, they were comfortable. So it was a flawed goal to begin with. But the thing that it took me a long time to realize what it was that I loved about being in a band. And it took me until I think after I was in the band. So my whole thing, I realized, is I just really like writing and recording music and creating stuff with my friends. I didn't care so much about being a front man. In fact, I actively disliked it. I had to drink every night to play. And I didn't necessarily love playing live, though I enjoyed it when I did it. For me, the real thrill was creating something. So being able to wrap my head around that after the fact, that's kind of how I guided a lot of decisions I made later on, was how can I do something that allows me to make stuff with people that I think are talented and that I like. as people. So looking back, that like was very successful because it kind of, it helped me understand what it was that I needed to get out of art to feel satisfied. And that wasn't necessarily being a lead singer in a band and, being a part of this specific scene or this specific moment in time. It just is more of like, how can I help people I think are super creative and talented make stuff that we both would be proud of. And so that kind of set me up, I feel like, for the rest of everything else I've done since.
I love that idea of, especially because most people get drawn to, playing in bands. Not even, I mean, you can't articulate the, ego that's attached to it. You're just like the impulse of like getting on stage and acting like an idiot with your friends. Like it just all sounds fun. But then it isn't until you like get up there and then maybe realize like, oh, I actually don't like playing that much because, like you start to understand the other elements that give you life in a particular project. And so when did you, like, pulling that apart a little bit, when did you realize that like, oh, the actual playing of the show is not that high in the priority list for me. Everything else around it is more important.
Yeah. I mean, it like, sorry, can you rephrase the question again? I got distracted in my own thought.
No, it's okay. I was just saying, when did you realize yourself that playing the show was not the most important thing for you personally as you were, existing in the band?
I think it was definitely by the last couple tours when I was having to get drunk every night to play. I started having this complex that everyone was showing up. It was doing me a favor, right? Like they're there and I feel like hyper vigilant and the need to manage their, I feel like they need to manage everyone's emotions and everyone has to have a good time because they're all doing me a favor by showing up there. So like that was already a terrible mindset to go into the thing with. So it's like the whole thing just stressed me out. I started like, I've been on medication for anxiety and depression for probably like 15 years at this point. I probably should have been on it for 2025. So all of that stuff really started rearing its head at the time. I started getting crazy anxious and depressed. And like a part of that for me is dread. Like I get crazy heavy dread and that would just like encapsulate me at those shows and on those last tours where I would just be like, fuck, we gotta go fucking play. And I would be sick to my stomach like an hour before the show. And I would just start pounding beer to get through it. So it was pretty apparent to me that that wasn't going to make me happy. And I think, I don't know why, but when the band broke up, I had a very specific goal to not let that be my identity because I could see how easy it would be for me to be like, I'm Jon from Down to Earth Approach for the rest of my life. Right. Like, and I didn't want that to be the end for me. So I divorced my personal feelings from what was happening as far as like me no longer being in this band and a part of this community and a part of this thing. And I just focused on trying to make myself happy and to do the next thing. So I think that really helped, right? Like it helped me put at least, it helped me put like priorities in place of like where to go next. And yeah, I mean, that's a long meandering way of saying it, but that's kind of, that kind of all led me to being like, I don't need to be a lead singer. I don't need to be on stage. I just need to be like making stuff. And part of it I realized too was I really got off on like the business side as much as I did the creative side. So I've always tried to keep a little of both since the band. I was a manager for a long time of artists. And now I'm a film producer. So it's like 50% business, 50% creative on both. But yeah, it just kind of helped set me up to realize what it was that I wanted to do.
Sure. The important things for your own pursuits, whatever that may mean. So
Evilgreed.net is the place you need to point your web browser towards, because truthfully, it is one of my favorite places to browse for vinyl, t-shirts, sweaters, long sleeves. But they have a very specific point of view. They work with bands that I like to define as sort of heavy artistic stuff. And trust me in saying that if you listen to this show, you absolutely will find so many things. It actually reminds me of like when I first started to get into punk and hardcore, and when Victory Records was, just the dominant player in the space. They had these things called the Victory Magazine, and I poured over these things. I spent hours looking at them and being like, "Hey mom, could I order $400 of band merch for Christmas?" And she's like, "Sure, why not?" Anyways, I digress, but that's the sort of feeling I get when I go to Evil Greed. Like, let me just list some of the bands and record labels they work with. How about a band like Angel Dust? Or how about a label like Iodine Records or Triple B or Flat Spot? They also work with incredible bands like Better Lovers, High Viz, the list goes on and on. But you get what I am saying by going to evilgreed.net, browsing around, and just exploring all the options they have. They're based in Berlin, Germany, but do not let that scare you off. They will be able to hook you up here in the States by shipping it to you at a very reasonable rate. The exchange rate is very advantageous for us right now, so you are winning across the board if you're ordering from them. So go to evilgreed.net, have fun exploring, and order a bunch of merch, and then tell them that we sent you. Maybe put in a little comment box like, "Heard about you on 100 Words or Less." Boom, there you go. Marketing works. So evilgreed.net, have fun shopping.
Football fans, picture this. You bet on your favorite player to score the first touchdown, and he throws an awesome block so his teammate can score instead. If this happens, BetMGM wants to give you another chance at the end zone. With BetMGM's second chance promotion, you'll get your stake back if your first touchdown scorer scores second instead. That's right, bet on any pro football player to score the first touchdown of the game. If you're right, you win. If your player scores second, you get your stake back in cash. Everyone knows the most exciting part of football is the score. With BetMGM's second chance promotion, you have a chance to keep the fun going after the first player crosses the goal line. Place a first touchdown score wager today. BetMGM and GameSense remind you to play responsibly. See BetMGM.com for terms. 21 plus only, DC only. Existing customer offer. Subject to eligibility requirements. Rewards vary. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
What you said dovetails well into I was going to ask in regards to the business of the band, because I know that part of you moving out to LA and obviously being closer to a lot of the labels and shows and all that sort of stuff, the idea of you getting an internship at Vagrant Records and then ultimately ending up signing with Vagrant, like that was clearly, part of, not part of the plans, but it was just like, right. Oh, wow. If, Vagrant is a really good option if we ever get a chance to talk to them. As you started to experience more of the, business side, like obviously you liked it, but, was there anything, I guess, surprising, like as you started to look at contracts and working with managers and booking agents, did you feel overwhelmed by it, excited by it, maybe a combination of all of those things?
I was excited about it. I was excited to be in proximity to these artists and this music that I loved. So I was always pretty curious. And basically, I went to college for a year, and it was for music management was the program. And I remember when I was dropping out, I told my, I don't even remember what they're fucking called, but what is the person who advises you?
Your counselor?
It's counselor or whoever heads up the program or whatever. I don't know. I was talking to him about, I'm going to drop out. I'm going to play music with my band, and I'm going to try and get an internship at a label. And he was like, if you do that, you will be 3 years ahead of everyone else in your class. So I fully support it. So I was just like, oh my God. Okay. So formal education really doesn't matter in this world. And then when I started interning at Vagrant, only maybe half the people went to college. And I was just like, okay, so it fully is about experience then. It's about getting your hands dirty. So I just kind of dove in and did as much as I could and learned as much as I could and tried to educate myself on all of the stuff. I just, I took in as much as I could, basically, and learned as much as I could.
Got it. And was any of it, I guess, surprising? Like, I mean, I know, just as an example, like I know for myself, when I was dealing with all the business stuff for my band, like it was surprising to learn certain things, whether it was just like, oh yeah, like if we cross the border, like, we have to hide our shirts in order to not get taxed or what. Right. Just like stupid. I mean, not even stupid things, but things where it's just like, oh, like, and not even mistakes, but just things that surprised you. So, do you have anything that stands out when I bring that example up?
Yeah. I'm having a flashback to us faxing SoundScan.
Sure.
With like 4 albums on the thing every, what was it, Tuesday or Sunday, or so one day a week. You're like, I remember us like scrambling to find a Kinko's on the road so we could fax our SoundScan, and our manager calling us and be like, we haven't fucking gotten it in yet. And it's so archaic and insane that we had to do that. I think it was a huge surprise to me, which is ridiculous, but that you would need, that it wasn't a surprise to me. I would say when we first got our deal from Vagrant as a band, and we were negotiating, with those guys, it was like the first time I had to pull my pants up and not just fold and be like, whatever the fuck they want. Like I just desperately wanted our lawyer to go easy and to not have cause a problem or make waves, which is so funny. Thankfully he did his thing, and not that it was a bad deal or anything, but like he did his due diligence and took care of us. But it was like the first time I had to be, I had to accept, okay, you're going to have to negotiate with people you really want to work with. So learning how to do that early on was like pretty important, I would say.
Right. I can completely understand the perspective of where you're coming from, where it's like, hey, here's the lawyer who's professional, knows how to deal with this stuff, but we don't blow this deal up for us. Don't ask, right? Don't ask for $5,000 more dollars, because that could be the nail in our coffin or whatever.
That's the shit I deal with now, but it's like me, negotiating something with A24 where I'm like, do not fuck this up.
Totally. Do you understand what Blumhouse means? Totally. And when you started to, like the podcast documents very well, the, idea of going on, club tours, and then obviously the difference between, headlining to nobody versus, supporting to, 1,000 people where 5% of the audience may care. What did you find, even though I know, like you were talking about before, the live show experience wasn't, the most fun for you. Did you, have a preference on the small show versus large show energy, or was it all kind of just, in the mix together of being like, this is all just okay?
If there was a crowd, I was fine. Even if they weren't even that psyched, it felt correct, right? There wasn't any cognitive dissonance happening in my mind around this big ass stage, and there's 15 people standing there. So I would say as long as it was a full room, I was feeling pretty comfortable, and I'd be it would be much easier for me to get through. Whether it was a large venue or a small venue, if it was very small attendance, that's when I would start getting anxiety.
Right. And kind of going back to the idea of your band being tailor-made for Vagrant in regards to the sound, not like you were writing to obviously get on Vagrant, but was there other, ambitions that you had for, it's like, oh man, if we could get on Equal Vision, or was it basically just whoever's the most excited to work with us, we're there, we're game? Or did you have other partners kind of in mind that you wanted to align yourselves with?
We were talking to a couple of other labels very casually, and Vagrant always was my absolute dream. When I got an internship there, I was so excited. So that already, I was like, this is heaven. I never in a million years would think that they would want to sign my band. So I was talking to other labels, and I had to, at that point I was working at Vagrant. I had a job and I didn't want to, I was doing my job and focusing on that. But when the whole marketing meeting thing happened, like we talked about in the podcast, basically Bobby sent our demo to Rich. Rich is the head of Vagrant. Rich found out that I was talking to these two other labels, and he's like, "The fuck you are!" And he just was like, "You're signing with Vagrant," and I think he said that before he even listened to it, and then he heard it, and that was probably like, okay, it's palatable. But it was some friendly competition from the beginning. So he was super excited about just trying to get me over with them.
Right. And it's so, I love that connection where it's, especially when you are, close to the label or close to, people at the label, where it's just that idea where it's like, why are these people in our backyard going to be like looking over at the neighbor's house? Like, no, that's not
exactly.
No way.
Yeah. I watch. Yeah.
Totally. I could care less if Jon is, a glorified intern at this point. Like you're getting in here. Like we're going to give you a development deal, and that's fine because
vibe, man.
and honestly, which to be completely, fair, like that definitely showcases their trust in, you and the idea of being like, oh, you hustled enough to show yourself to be able to work appropriately at a record label and be like, oh, if you could make this work and like, trip your way into this office. And I'm using that pejoratively, but but just that idea that, oh, you showcase this, like you can probably, make this work in some capacity for us.
Yeah. And what had also happened was, there was this band called Jackson, which was Chris Shiplet from the Foo Fighters. It was all Chris's songs, and it was Scott, his brother, who played bass in Face to Face, and Pete Parada, who at the time was playing with Saves the Day. And they were playing one live show, and they needed a guitar player. So Pete, I was super close with Pete from Saves the Day because he's from Arkport, I believe, which is like Rochester. So we bonded very, very early on when I was working at the label about growing up where we grew up. And he threw me in the mix, and Scott was like, oh yeah, I know Lullo from the label. So I went and practiced with them once, and they were like, he'll do. So I played a show with those guys, and a lot of the Vagrant people, I think, came to it. So they knew I could at least play, and that, that these guys would at least co-sign me to have me playing with them. So I was kind of already in the mix to begin with, but yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot of it was, I was very, very close with Rich. I became super close with him and his family. His sister too, I still talk to her and hang out. She's a director. I used to go to his mom's house and hang out with his kids and his wife. So like I was hard in the Vagrant cinematic universe. I was very hard coded in there already. So basically, yeah, just hearing that those two other labels were talking to me, it's like,
yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's not gonna fly.
Yeah.
When there's a moment in the podcast in which you're articulating the story of your drummer that left, came back, and then left again, and left at the end of a tour. And I mean, that's always like anytime anybody leaves a band, it's always, traumatic in a variety of different circumstances, sometimes good, sometimes like, oh, thank God this person left. Now we can move on. But when you had the idea of being like, all right, well, we're going to, hire this drummer, friends of a friend. And like, it was not a good experience, like not to bury the lead in regards to the way the podcast unfolds. But what tickled me was the, stick to itiveness, where I think every band has that sort of hard baked into them, when they've toured and they realize like, canceling shows or like letting people down, whatever that may mean, like the other bands on the tour or whatever. Was that, like, was there any other option to like not finish that tour in your heads, or it was just like, dude, we're going to move hell or high water. Like, we're going to finish this tour, even though this may be an absolute catastrophe?
We were absolutely going to finish it. We were we were on tour with, it was Brazil, Emery, and From First to Last. And I want to say the drummer for Emery was offering to play like half of our set, and the drummer from Brazil was offering to play half of our set. But before I could even like let Rich at Vagrant know, like I just gave him like a heads up, by the way, Pete's leaving, we're going to get our shit together. He's like, I'll get the guy, don't worry. And he made some calls, and, that's like kind of how we ended up with who we ended up with. But basically we were going to do whatever we needed to do to begin with. So it was a matter of just figuring out, are we going to jam someone else from one of the other bands, or are we going to get our own guy out of here?
Right. Right. I do. And there is something that really is special, like what you're talking about, the tour mates trying to, fill in and be able to pull through. There is something that is so incredibly special about our broad DIY community of just being like, oh, someone's in need. Like, even though we've known these people for, 20 days or whatever on tour, like we'll kill our firstborn child or whatever, like whatever it is to help.
Yeah, you bond very quickly on tour with the other bands, like in a way where you're like, we're never not going to talk to each other and be in each other's lives. And then it's like a week later, you haven't even thought about this person, at all. And it's so while you're in it, you're like, you would pretty much kill for these other people.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, totally. And even though, to your point, it's like, well, you probably in the same way that many other tour experiences, like you would see someone from Monine now and be like, oh yeah, like what's up? Like,
absolutely. I mean, dude, my old band toured with The Forecast 6 times. Dustin from The Forecast, my best friend, I helped him get his job in management when I was managing, and now he manages Fall Out Boy and Weezer. So like all of our people are in the system now. Like Matt from the Starting Line's been at Fender forever, and like, it's just funny. We're all old with old people jobs now.
Yeah. Well, but all attached to creative pursuits, whatever that may mean. And I think there's something that is pretty special, because even though, a majority of people, don't make a living off of literally playing music, there's enough attached to it that is, or even, other creative pursuits like what you're doing, to be like, oh yeah, like we can be adults, but still be, absolute idiots. Like we're fine.
Absolutely. Yeah. For sure.
I'm sorry. I just called you an idiot. And then...
No, that's true.
Yeah.
You're not wrong.
So with the, I want to go back to what you were saying in regards to, separating the, ego, like, oh yes, I will forever be known as, Jon from Down to Earth Approach. Like a lot of people, as they're transitioning out of their bands, and not even like, I make it sound graceful, like transition, like, there when bands break up, and a lot of people like flounder. They don't know exactly what to do. People don't, text them or email them for shows or whatever. So it's like, what am I supposed to do? So it sounds like you obviously took a different approach, but then did you have to, for lack of a better term, find your identity elsewhere? Like you built your, muscles up in different capacities?
Yeah. I mean, I knew I wanted to get a job in the music industry again. So I had interned at Vagrant. I worked at Vagrant. Then I was signed to Vagrant. I knew I didn't want to do a label again because CDs were shitting the bed. And it was when labels were starting to lay people off every 6 months. I was like, fuck no. And I figured management wasn't a terrible road to go down. Because it's less corporate and less formal it's more of a free flowing thing. It just seemed interesting to me. And, was kind of like, I know how to do the indie rock side, music thing. I want to see how the other half lives. So I basically was like, who manages all of the massive bands from our scene? And I looked it up, and it was all this company called Crush. It was called Crush Management at the time. Now it's called Crush Music. So I emailed Jonathan Daniel, who's one of the owners. And I think I was just like, hey, I'm just getting out of being in a band. I feel like this is something I'd love to get into and would love to learn from you guys. Please let me know if anything ever opens up. And at the time they were managing the Bronx, and half of the Bronx had worked at Vagrant. So I think when Jonathan got my email, he hit up Joby or Tweety from the Bronx and was like, hey, do you know this dude? And they were like, yeah, you'll love him. You should meet him. So I flew out. He hit me back, and I flew out and met with him and was like, I want to learn from this guy. This is probably the smartest dude I've ever met. Like the first time I met him. So I went back home, and luckily they gave me an offer for a job. And, I really devoted about 8 years to managing and learning how to manage and learning as much as I could. And I actually feel like the process of that, and with how entrepreneurial Crush is, it's like the greatest place I could have ever worked. It was such a good job. It's so entrepreneurial, and they give you such freedom to explore that I feel like I went to creative CEO school, basically. Like, I feel like I could do anything within this creative field. I had chosen to do music instead of film school for my 1 year of college, knowing I would probably want to eventually go into film. And I saw a lot of the parallels of what I was doing as a manager in music. And, I just saw the transferable skills. So again, I defined like, what do I want to do? I want to make stuff, and I want to help people make stuff. The next thing I really was interested in learning was producing film. So I, kind of really poured myself into studying that while I was still managing. And then kind of slowly transitioned out of managing and moved into doing that full time.
That's cool. What drew you about the, I guess, film, production aspect? Because, there's clearly a connection. Like most music people, love films almost as much, if not more than, than some music stuff. What drew you into that?
I always loved movies, and I loved the music business. And so I started really reading about the movie business also at the same time, like reading, like, what you're doing, even when you're reading like The Operator, like the David Geffen biography, it starts to dabble in the movie side, and it seems interesting. So then I started reading books about, there's just one book called Down and Dirty Pictures. It's about like the, Sundance kind of revolution of film. And that was the same kind of vibe. And I just really loved how fast paced and cutthroat and crazy the entertainment industry is as a whole. I mean, there are so many terrible things about it and so many things that need to change, but when it's cool, it's very cool. And it's like awesome to work in. So I just really saw that, like, I guess I had to make a decision at one point in music of like, what do I want to do? I was in a band. I worked at a label. At this point, I had managed bands. One of the bands I managed won a Grammy and sold millions of records. I did a lot, and I was kind of feeling unfulfilled. I wasn't feeling like I was getting the creative itch scratched as much as I was before, and it felt like a lot of it was admin and business. So I decided, like, maybe I should try film, and what would my job be in film? And to me, it was like what I was doing as a manager was the same job as like a classic role of a movie producer. So it's like once I made that connection. I just studied all I could and learned about it and made friends with people and made sure I was getting in the mix and meeting people and asking people out for coffee and taking them out for beers and doing what I could to learn. And then I just kind of made a move at one point.
Right. Yeah, you did the Vagrant Records internship, except for right. Yeah, totally. You're like, listen, I know how to like be around, and then I know how to like potentially seize an opportunity when it hits me in the face. I'm good at that.
1,000%. 1,000%.
Yeah. Two last things I want to hit on was the idea that there's always the rose-colored glasses that you're putting on when you're looking nostalgically back at something. When this project was getting put together and, you were making decisions of what to, share and not share and that sort of creative process, was there anything that you were like, oh yeah, like we shouldn't put this out there for this particular reason that this might bum out this person? Or like, what were the, I guess, creative decisions that you had to make that, in putting something like this together?
We were, compared to everyone else, a pretty tame band. So there wasn't that crazy of stuff where we're like, oh my God, we totally can't. But it was more just like us doing dumb shit, right? Like it was more like, what's going to be boring to people? A lot of it, I would say we used mostly as sound design and less of like featuring these moments. So what was really important to us was getting a certain mood at times for like the specific, scene that we're going through. But, there was a lot of swearing, and it was irritating to me because I was editing the podcast. I realized how much I swear on camera, and it was turning me off. So I started actively just editing like a psycho, like so many fucks and shits and fucking this. And that was like so irritating to me after a certain point. Even like the current day interviews, we're all terrible people. Like I can't believe the way we talk. It's wild. So for me, it was mostly about like what sounds interesting or has a hook that we can build on and isn't annoying to listen to.
Sure. Right. Isn't great, especially too, because most people, especially when they are hearing themselves from many, many years ago, they're, no matter what, you're going to be like, I sound like an idiot. I hate the way my voice sounds or whatever. You're always going to be really critical, but that's funny that that's the first thing that jumped out at you. We're like, dude, come on. I'm swearing so much. I sound like an idiot.
Yeah. We're just like stupid 20-year-old kids. Like you hear 20-year-olds talk, it's not intelligent. Nothing about it is awesome. So It was just about finding like the moments that had like some sort of magic to it that we could sprinkle in.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to put you on the spot for the final question. Two things I'll ask. One of them being what you would define as because you were existing very much, in and around the Vagrant Records catalog and bands, and you intimately familiar with what they had going on. Can you name, in your opinion, what would be like a deeper cut, beyond obviously all the bands that most people know, from Vagrant? It doesn't even have to be during the era when, you were signed to the label. What would you define as a deep cut that people need to pay attention to that, maybe is just undiscovered?
Yeah, I would say it's Hot Rod Circuit. I'm trying to remember. This one's for Randy. It is only available on a 7-inch. I don't know why these guys don't have it on a DSP anywhere. I should talk to them right now and tell them that it is like one of the best Hot Rod Circuit songs of all time. And I remember I had the 7-inch and I would actually listen to it because these goddamn guys don't have it anywhere. It's crazy. So yes, you have to find this one's for Randy. It's amazing.
Wow. So what was it on a 7-inch? Like, I don't even,
it was the anniversary split.
The anniversary split. Yeah. Okay. Oh, wow. Yeah. No, I remember I have that 7-inch, but I don't particularly remember that song leaping out. But
they play it live. It's fucking awesome, man. It's so good.
Wow. That's good. Hot Rod is one of those bands where it's like they were the epitome of a band's band during that era, where it was like,
God, yeah.
everybody wanted
Like
to hang out with them. Yeah.
Like that, they might honestly, if I'm being honest, they're probably my favorite band of all time, I would say.
Wow. Okay. I like it. I like it. That's a bold statement, but a statement I would stand by. I like that.
We're doing a 20th anniversary show later this year, next month. And Andy from Hot Rod's playing also. He's playing acoustic. So I love that band to death.
Right. You're like, you've got no choice. You are participating in this show, whether it's the full band or you, Andy, you got to make it
basically. Yeah.
Yeah. And kind of springboarding off of that, putting you on the spot again of the, a podcast that was very influential for you, not even in, putting together the show that you did, but just that, informed or something that you regularly listen to, a podcast that you would be like, yo, listen to this Hot Rod Circuit song and then listen to this podcast.
Yeah, I would say that podcast, I'm scanning through real quick because I'm blanking on the name.
It's okay.
But I always refer to this one. Oh my God, what is wrong with me? Where is it? That's right. So it was New York Times Caliphate. It was the first mixed media podcast that I had heard where they're using archival, they're using, current day interviews and narration, and they're on multiple formats, and she's using her mini recorder. It's so cool. That was a big influence for this as far as how we could build episodes. But they do it so much better. I mean, it's so well done. That one I highly recommend. I want to say it's controversial for the recording, but who fucking cares? It's so good.
Yeah. No, I was gonna say, if you weren't aware of the controversy of most of that being not true, then yes, but the actual execution of that thing, it's just if you look at it now as a work of fiction, then it's totally.
Is it that bad? I don't even know that much of the follow up. It's that bad.
No. It's okay. Yeah, no, and I'm not here to burst anybody's bubbles, but I just want to make sure that you were informed where so it's it became clear that the person that was the subject of it, the guy from Canada that, was attached. Like that. I mean, almost all of the story was made up by him and just complete. Yeah. I'll send you an article afterwards, but basically. Yeah. Well, so, I mean,
then I can also revise that answer to the Trojan horse affair for similar reasons.
Absolutely. No, those, and
you're like that one, they found out the guy was actually lying. Please. No.
No, for sure. Yeah. Every show you bring up, it's like, well, John, funny you mentioned that, person's a white supremacist, huh? How about that? No, that's Trojan Horse Affair is very good. And Caliphate is really good. Like I said, you just have to, pay attention to the source, so to speak. Even though it's you would feel that the New York Times would be, pretty buttoned up in regards to, but that one definitely, the proverbial goalie was pulled and whatever. So anyways, but regardless, thank you for letting me put you on the spot, and thank you for hanging out with me. I was very glad to catch up with you, even though we didn't know each other, but now we do, and it's great.
Thank you, man. I really am happy to be here.
All right. That is indeed what is up. Shout out to Jon for making this happen. Shout out to Devin from an amazing company called Tink Media, who does podcast to podcast promo. Whoever knew that was a thing. I do because I work in the podcast industry, but brought this idea to me and drilled down on it. Loved it. Did it. So thank you very much, Devin. Appreciate that. And next week, I have a great in-person conversation that I did with Matthew Wainwright, who plays in a band called Cold God, who released an LP that may potentially make it to my top 10 of the year. It is astonishingly good. I love it so much. So I had to have him come over, and he was excited to come over because it was a very adorable story he told at the very end of the show that he had been listening to this show for, 8-9 years, and this was a big deal to him. So because it was a big deal to him, it was a big deal to me, and just, makes it feel real special what we're doing here. So anyways, Matthew Wainwright from Cold God is up next week. And until then, please be safe, everybody.
This podcast is supported by BetterHelp, offering licensed therapists you can connect with via video, phone, or chat. Here's BetterHelp Head of Clinical Operations Hesyu Joe discussing who can benefit from therapy.
I think a lot of people think that you're supposed to be going to therapy once you're like having panic attacks every day. But before you get to that point, I think once you start even noticing that you feel a little bit off and you can't maintain this harmony that you once had in relationships, that could be a sign that maybe you want to go talk to somebody. There's always a benefit in talking to someone because we can all benefit from improved insight about ourselves and who we are and how we behave with other people. So if you're human, that's like a good indicator that you could benefit from talking to somebody.
Find out if therapy is right for you. Visit BetterHelp.com today. That's BetterHelp.com.
Our iHeartRadio Music Festival, presented by Capital One, coming back to Las Vegas, September 20th and 21st. A weekend full of superstar performances. A$AP Rocky, Big Sean, Camila Cabello, Doja Cat, Dua Lipa, Gwen Stefani, Halsey, Hozier, Keith Urban, New Kids on the Block, Paramore, Shabuzi, The Black Crowes, The Weeknd, Thomas Rhett, Victoria Monet, Coldplay's Chris Martin, and more. Stream live only on Hulu and get tickets to be there at AXS.com.
It's 4 a.m., Monday, and you're literally sucking baby snot through a tube because she's congested. Man, that's love. And if you love her that much, love her enough to make sure she's buckled in the right car seat. To make sure your child's in the right seat for their age and size, visit nhtsa.gov/the right seat. Show them you love them. Keep them safe. Visit nhtsa.gov/the right seat. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.